Good evening. This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature today. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, and there's a semi-blizzard going on outside, a bit of snow, a little bit of wind, and it's a tough atmosphere outside, but inside the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill, it's festive, and if you want a nice drink, a good meal, you can come down to downtown Bismarck, visit the Peacock Alley, and you will not be disappointed. This evening, in the first hour of our show, we have the North Dakota Tax Commissioner, Mr. Corey Fong. We will also have later in our broadcast the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation Director, Leanne Birch. With Mr. Fong, we intend to discuss a number of tax issues, and Corey Fong is a former Deputy Secretary of State. He was appointed Tax Commissioner by Governor John Hoeven and subsequently elected to his job. He is up for election, I believe, next year. Is that correct, Mr. Fong?
That's right. I am. 2014.
Outstanding. And first of all, welcome to the show, Mr. Fong.
Thanks a lot, Dale. I appreciate being here. This is my first chance to visit with you on this program.
Outstanding. And can you just tell us, how is the tax filing season going?
It's going well. I mean, it's still early for the most part. We got off to a little bit of a slow start because of some of the changes at the federal level caused a delay in the start to the filing season at the federal level, and so therefore it also caused a delay at the state level. So we're a little bit behind in total returns that have come in, but it's going well. We're turning returns around quickly. Of course, as a result of e-file, that helps us to do that, and I've had some people even comment how quickly we're turning those returns around in less than a week's time. So, but it's going well. We have about 410 plus thousand returns that will come in total this filing season, and we have a vast majority of them left. But again, it's the tax filing season for us, especially with electronic filing, is almost on autopilot. It does impact our office in the fact that we've got more calls, we've got more temporary employees that we bring on for the processing season. But for the most part, it really is something that we've gotten down to a science almost.
How many folks file paper returns these days?
We're down to about 20% of our filers filing electronically. We're very pleased that this last year marked a milestone for us, hitting that 80% mark. And that's, we think that's good. We probably aren't going to see a significant increase over that going forward, but we think that that's a good place to be in terms of our electronic filing numbers. And keep in mind, we've done that without any statewide mandates. We haven't forced anyone to say you've got to file electronically. We've benefited from some of the federal changes that have required preparers to file electronically, of course, but we've not imposed any statewide mandates. So we were really pleased about having 80% of our filers filing electronically these days.
What type of percentage do you think eventually folks will file using the traditional paper forms?
Dale, we've talked about this in the past. I don't ever see us getting to a point where we're going to have 100% electronic filing, just because there are certain filers who, because of their return, they file a paper return. There's sometimes more complicated returns, and there's a certain population out there that just worries about the electronic filing. They don't sure that they trust it. But I think if we can get to that 90% range, I think that's a good place for us to be. The key for us going forward is not so much our emphasis on individual income tax filing electronically, but the other tax types, sales tax, moving people into our web file program for our sales tax filing requirements, and some of the other tax types that we administer, which are administered throughout the year. I mean, everyone focuses on individual income tax because that's the tax that most people they file, and of course they're accustomed to the deadline between January 1st and April 15th being the deadline. But we're receiving tax returns throughout the year from businesses, small businesses, companies, and individuals, and we'd like to get more of those folks filing electronically.
To what extent do people? First of all, let's go back to the mandate business. Do you foresee ever having a mandate for individual income tax filers to file electronically?
Dale, I really don't at the statewide level. Again, the feds have required that certain preparers that file over, I believe it's 10 returns, file electronically, and so we've certainly benefited from those kinds of changes at the federal level because, of course, those folks are then going to file most likely electronically at the state level. But I just don't think that there's an appetite necessarily for that at the state level, but, we'll see. We've done most of this through promotion, through education, through trying to make the case to the taxpayer that they benefit from electronic filing because of the benefits of credits, deductions that are served up through that electronic filing process that they might not know about if they were filing by paper. And so that really has been our approach, is to try to make it as attractive as possible and promote it versus force it. And I think we've been successful.
How much more quickly do you get your refund if you file electronically?
Right now, we're processing, as I said, electronic returns in less than a week's time. Matter of fact, there are a few that we've heard of that have actually seen their return turned around in about 4 days, and that's when they file to when the money's directly deposited in their account if they're getting a refund back, which we think is pretty remarkable considering all of the returns that we're processing during the filing season. That, of course, gets a little bit longer towards the end of the filing season when we start having more returns hit the system. But for the most part, we say about a week's time. The feds are doing a good job these days, too. I heard someone recently who said that their federal return was turned around in about a week's time at the federal level. So I thought that was impressive. But the feds, too, of course, will see more activity as we get towards the deadline, and that will, of course, slow down their processing time as well.
From the lips of Tax Commissioner Corey Fong of North Dakota, the federal government is doing a good job at something. Oh, my goodness.
Well, this year, they certainly have been turning those returns around quite efficiently.
What has the legislative session been like for the tax department so far, Mr. Fong?
Well, Dale, because you've covered so many sessions, that it's busy. This is probably taking more of our time, quite frankly, than the filing season. There were approximately 142 tax bills that were filed, and not all of those obviously require us to do extensive analysis, but a lot of them, of course, as you know, require fiscal analysis, fiscal notes to be attached, where we actually have to do the analysis to show how much revenue either increase or reduction results from the bill, and those, of course, take a lot of time, especially on the part of our research staff. So it does create quite a bit of workload for us. And, of course, you know that the legislature has focused so much on tax relief, tax reform in the last 3 sessions. So it's a lot like the last couple of sessions where taxes have been front and center. And we've got a very good staff, legislative staff that monitors all of these bills. Of course, there's a lot of bills in income tax. There's a number of property tax proposals, both relief and reform. And then the other various tax types that legislators are proposing legislation on that require us to monitor. So it's a busy time for us, but it's going well, I think. We're about, like I said before we started, that we're not really at halftime because I think the session breaks down in 3 major parts. There's the first half, the second half, and then conference committees. And so we're not really quite at that half point at this point. So there's still a lot of time. There's still a lot of ideas in some cases that haven't even been put on the table because a lot of these ideas, as you know, come out at the very end of the session. I remember a couple sessions ago where the big property tax relief proposal was not hatched until the closing hours of the session. That was 2007. And so there are ideas that we don't even know about that may emerge.
And as it turned out, as I recall, the idea you're talking about, it turned out to be not that great of an idea, the idea of reimbursing people's property tax through an income tax credit.
You're exactly right. The 2007 session where we were going along the entire time thinking that we were going to reduce by a percentage individuals' property tax bills, and in the end we ended up with a property tax credit that was taken on the individual income tax return, and it was complicated. It worked, but it wasn't the most artful approach, and it was confusing for taxpayers. It was difficult for tax preparers, and of course it required a lot of administration from our office and the counties. But, it's evolved, as you know. Now we're into the mill levy reduction grant program, which is still alive. It's been the main vehicle for property tax relief and savings the last 2 legislative sessions, and there are versions of it out there this session too. So, but my point in all of this is there's a lot of time left, and there will be ideas that still emerge that might actually end up coming through in the end.
Could you you mentioned the analysis process that when a tax bill is introduced, could you just kind of walk us through what happens? Okay, a legislator puts in a tax bill and it comes up to your department. What happens then?
Well, a lot of times legislators will also ask us before they even introduce the legislation what the expected fiscal impact will be. And we try to be as helpful and as accommodating as possible to try to help them with that before they decide if they want to put a proposal forward. Then, assuming that they do introduce the legislation, they get all the required number of sponsors and signatures, then the bill is introduced, and at some point before the hearing, we get a request for a fiscal note, if it requires a fiscal note. We have to turn those around very quickly, and because of the volume of tax bills, sometimes we don't get those fiscal note requests until just a few days before the hearing. The hearing then, we try to get the fiscal notes down to the committees so that they have a good fiscal note in front of them while they're looking at the bill. And then, of course, once it gets into the committee level, then that bill can change, and depending on the kinds of changes that are made to a bill, amendments, for example, the fiscal note might change again because they might fundamentally change the bill enough that it requires a new fiscal note. And so they'll request an amended version of the fiscal note, and then we, again, put that analysis forward. The committee then looks at the new analysis, and then they make their decision. So throughout this process, we're constantly analyzing the bill, depending on the scope, depending on the changes that are made. And all of that takes a lot of time. In some cases, it's not just analysis that we're doing based on data that we have in the department, but it's also data that we rely on from other organizations. If it's a bill related to motor vehicle excise tax reductions, for example, we might reach out to our friends who work in that particular industry, the motor vehicle industry, for example, the motor carriers, or the Auto Dealers Association. If it's related to reductions in income tax rates, we might have to reach out to some of our friends at the federal level to figure out what the impact of the various proposals might have on or how they relate to the federal income tax and how it works. And so my point is that it does take quite a bit of analysis, and it sometimes requires us to reach outside the department to get it done.
One of the things that one hears about, well, first of all, let's back up for a moment. Tell us what a fiscal note is.
Well, a fiscal note is basically the potential revenue impacts, or in the case of an administrative change, what that might cost us to implement it. We don't have a lot of notes that we develop that are related to the administrative costs for our agency. Most of them are, what is this bill going to do in terms of increasing the general fund, increasing other funds, or reducing the general fund or other funds? Or in the case of some of these various proposals out there to increase the state aid, what the revenue impacts will be to local governments, counties and cities. And so we have a research analyst and a research and education division within the department that does all of that analysis and determines that fiscal analysis and provides what is known as a fiscal note on the bill that then gets attached to the bill. But as I said, a fiscal note can take other forms as well. It can be just simply the cost for an agency to administer the bill or the legislative proposal. And those might be in the form of programming costs, administrative costs. Maybe it requires additional full-time employees or temporary employees. And so a fiscal note really can run the whole scope in terms of what the costs to the state are.
One of the bills that was introduced during the session, it has been defeated, would have suspended the income tax for 2 years. And during the debate on this bill, there was some discussion about how this would affect the tax department's operations in terms of people who handle income tax. You have a certain number of folks in your agency that handle income tax, and what are they going to do if the income tax is suspended? what my question is to what extent do you analyze the effects of tax bills in terms of your own agency's employment?
Well, in that case, that particular bill, which would have suspended it, we had a lot of questions because it wasn't clear whether or not we would be continuing to audit for prior years. And so from our perspective, there was still a need for an income tax staff that would do some of the existing audits and do some of the existing work for prior year returns. There also is quite a bit of shifting these days in our focus on sales tax, and so there was some discussion in that particular bill that some of the staff in the department would be shifted to work in the sales tax arena. So I don't even know if that bill actually got down to the discussion about how much we'd be able to reduce staff or cut staff in our department, but it did definitely, I think, bring up the idea that we could shift to other tax types where there's greater focus, and there could be some other analysis and audit that needs to be done for prior year returns that was not contemplated in that particular piece of legislation. So, in that case, there really wasn't much, I think, analysis on our part as to what that would impact, how that would impact our agency.
What sort of enforcement issues are the most prominent in the tax department today?
I'd say sales tax for sure. I mean, without a doubt, we are seeing more activity, business activity that is happening, especially out in the western part of the state. We've joined forces with some other agencies to collaborate on that enforcement with the Attorney General's office and the Secretary of State's office as it relates to contractors, new contractors coming into the state, and what their tax obligations, both registration and filing requirements are. We've also been collaborating with Highway Patrol and the DOT with regard to dyed fuel enforcement, which is motor fuels taxes. So I would say that a lot of the activity and the compliance issues that we're dealing with are related to the increase in our economic activity, especially out west, although we're seeing an uptick in activity across the state. But without a doubt, I think the main focus, the main issues with regard to compliance are sales taxes.
You mentioned dyed fuel enforcement. Can you explain what is the significance of dyed fuel?
There are two tax rates for diesel fuel. There's an on-road rate, which is intended to compensate for the wear and tear on the roads, and it's a higher rate. And then there's an off-road rate. And the off-road rate is a reduced rate, which is intended for producers and construction folks, and it's intended to be a lower rate because they're supposedly not using those vehicles on the roads. And so dyed fuel is the off-road diesel and is only supposed to be used in non-licensed vehicles that is used for off-road purposes. But occasionally there are folks that want to use dyed fuel for on-road purposes. And so we have a compliance initiative in place right now. Again, we've been collaborating with Highway Patrol and DOT to make sure that those folks that are using dyed diesel fuel are only using it for off-road purposes. And if they're using it on road, they're subject to fines and penalties, not only at the state level but at the federal level as well.
What color is the dye?
It's red. It dyes the fuel kind of a dark pink, but it shows up as a light pink at times as well. But it is actually dyed at the rack and by the distributor, and so again, it is taxed at a reduced rate to reflect the fact that it's not used for on-road purposes. And so we've been out there last year and a half. We've been out to communities across the state, piggybacking on some of the enforcement efforts by the Highway Patrol, and we've been dipping tanks, and it's been a successful initiative. And this session it's come up a little bit because I think one of the legislators, Senator Dotzenrod, has a bill in to increase those fines. And it's come up in our budget hearing because, of course, we've been doing this and we've been doing these compliance checks and initiatives for the last year and a half, and so there's been some discussion about that as a part of our budget.
Tell us how you became tax commissioner.
how did I become tax commissioner?
Yes.
Well, that's an interesting set of events. As you pointed out, I was the Deputy Secretary of State for a few years. I was also the Director of Elections, spent most of my time in the Secretary of State's office. But I spent some time in politics, too. I ran legislative races back in 2000, and then, of course, I ran Governor Hovind's first successful re-elect in 2004. And then I came out of the 2004 election cycle and went into the Commerce Department. I was asked to be the deputy there and managed the legislative agenda for the Commerce Department in the 2005 session. And it was during the 2005 session or just thereafter when the current tax commissioner at the time, Rick Clayburgh, resigned to take another job, and there was a vacancy in that position. And I put my name forward, and then Governor Hovind, now Senator Hovind, appointed me the tax commissioner's office. I started as of June 1st of 2005, and was elected for my first time in 2006, and then again elected 4 years later in 2010. So going back to the beginning of the program, I am up for election again in 2014, and it's been a great opportunity. I've learned a lot. As you know, Dale, my first place in state government was in the Secretary of State's office. I am not by training a tax person, but we have a tremendous staff in the department that do a phenomenal job. I see myself more as an agency administrator and manager, and I think that's primarily the reason that I'm in the post that I'm in. But it has been a tremendous opportunity, especially at this time when we're dealing with historic opportunities for the state, historic revenues across all different tax types, sales, income, oil and gas for sure. And we have, as a result of that, some extraordinary challenges, too, and I think you're seeing some of that play out during this legislative session with what the legislature is dealing with.
Just one more question. Are you going to run for re-election?
I plan to, yes.
Well, very well. We have been speaking this evening to Mr. Corey Fong. He is the North Dakota Tax Commissioner. He's a Republican, and as you just heard him say, he's been the Tax Commissioner since 2005. Before that, he worked as Deputy Secretary of State and also as the State Elections Director. He also worked for the Commerce Department and managed Governor John Hovind's re-election campaign in 2004. Thank you for coming this evening, Mr. Fong. We do appreciate your time, and thanks for the information.
Yeah, thanks, Dale. Appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Up next, we will have the State Corrections Director. Her name is Leanne Birch, and we'll be speaking to her about her agency's budget and corrections issues during the 2013 legislature.
The Legislature Today show continues. Find us always online at GreatPlainsNews.com, GreatPlainsNews.com. And don't forget, we're live at the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar, the National Cattlemen's Association Beef Innovator of the Year, with great specials. Come on down to the Peacock Alley. And now back to the Legislature Today with your host, Dale Wetzel.
This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today. We're speaking to you from the Peacock Alley American Grill and Bar in downtown Bismarck. In the second half hour of our show, we have the North Dakota Director of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Her name is Leanne Birch. We also have the agency's top fiscal officer. His name is Dave Krabbenhoft, and we're going to be speaking to both of them about what's going on in the legislature in corrections and the sorts of issues that everyone is trying to resolve. Welcome, lady and gentlemen. First of all, can you tell us, Ms. Birch, about the progress of the state penitentiary renovation?
Well, we're heading towards completion. Obviously, it's taken a little bit longer than we wanted it to, basically because of the labor shortages. However, we hope to be substantially completed by the end of April and hopefully be able to occupy at least a portion of it by May.
To what extent have these delays hampered what you're able to do?
Well, right now, our population continues to grow. The county jails are full, so we've had to add some additional beds in some of our housing units at the state penitentiary as well as James River Correctional Center to get by until the new beds are ready to come online.
And how many more inmates will you be able to house once this project is completed?
Well, the net gain of beds is about 240 beds. However, we already have over 100 out in county jails, so we'll eventually bring those back in. And if our population continues to grow, we'll probably occupy the whole entire penitentiary by the end of the biennium.
And what are the growth trends in inmate numbers right now?
Well, for the last 6 years, we were fairly stable with probably around 2% or less population growth. However, because of the growth of the state, along with prosperity, comes stress on the criminal justice system. And recently, over the last quarter, we gained, well, at least year last time, we had 100 fewer inmates. So our growth rate probably jumped up to about 7.2%.
And what is this because of? What is causing this?
Well, the felony filings have increased significantly. If you look at the felony filings from 2011 to 2012, they increased across the state by 15%. And in the northwest region of the state, that Northwest Judicial District, they had over a 35% increase in felony filings. So a lot of people coming to the state and getting in trouble, and they eventually end up in our system.
To what extent has the nature of the makeup of the prison population changed in the last 5 to 10 years?
Well, if you talk to the individuals who work inside the prison, they would say probably over the last 2 years, what they're seeing is a more violent type of offender coming into the prison. We're seeing a lot more out-of-state individuals getting into trouble, coming in on more violent crimes. So obviously they're serving longer sentences. All you have to do is read the news and you see a number of violent crimes occurring around the state. And when they're sentenced to a life sentence, that takes a bed out of our system for 30 plus years. So that's impacting our population growth.
Could you tell us about what you asked the legislature for in terms of increased personnel for the department?
Sure. Well, last biennium they did add a number of FTEs to staff the state penitentiary. However, they didn't fully give us all the FTEs to fully staff it. So for correctional staff at NDSP, we're asking for an additional 14 FTE. Most of those are correctional officers, case managers, and a unit manager to complete the staffing of the state penitentiary. The other FTEs, the remaining, are 6 parole and probation officers, and they're very critical to how we do business. As our state has grown, so too has the probation and parole population, and we're up over 500 offenders in the past year. And so caseloads, which have traditionally been around 60 to 75, which is manageable, are up to 80, 90, in some cases 100 caseloads. And so that's putting a lot of stress on our officers out in the field. And when they have those high of caseloads, they're not really able to work with the offender to prevent violations. They're responding to violations, and thus they drive more of those supervised probationers into the prison system.
Will these 6 additional parole and probation officers be able to give you the sort of ratio that you want in terms of officers to a number of offenders?
They should help, but if our population continues to grow, we'll probably be in the same situation by next biennium.
You mentioned that the newly renovated and enlarged penitentiary might be full at the end of this next biennium by June of 2015. Is that your projection?
If we continue to grow at the rate that we are presently growing at, we'll most likely be full by the end of the biennium.
And are you doing anything presently to try to plan for that day, the possibility that day arrives where the prison is full again?
Well, then we'll do what we've been doing, and that's basically defaulting to the county jails for overflow inmate housing.
What do the legislators say when you mentioned that this might be a possibility, because I imagine they didn't foresee this happening when they approved the project?
Well, when we were going through the study, obviously what they were looking at is our current growth rate, which had been stable for 6 years. When they did the study, the consultants said that's very dependent on a lot of variables. And of course, the oil boom hit, and that's changed the dynamics of the criminal justice system, and including how it impacts corrections. So I don't think it's a big surprise that we're seeing the growth in our system.
Will we have, do you believe, another prison expansion project in our future reasonably soon?
I hate to say. I'm not sure.
I mean, what sort of options are there if that was something that needed to be done? Would the Bismarck Penitentiary be expanded? Would we go to Jamestown where there's another facility, or what would happen?
Well,
do you think?
when they were in the planning phase of expanding the penitentiary, one of the conditions they wanted the design architects to design it is that it would be expandable. So the design we have and the way the expansion was built would allow for future expansion on the site.
We're speaking with Leanne Birch. She's the Director of Corrections and Rehabilitation for the state of North Dakota. Could you tell us, when the new penitentiary is fully operational, how will it be an improvement over what we've had before?
We'll obviously have a lot more safety and security features. We're going from about 30 cameras to about 300 cameras. Our perimeter will be much more secure with a double fence going all around the perimeter. We obviously had some great concerns other than just inmate housing. The medical facility is vastly improved. We've been working with a total of 5 infirmary beds for really the whole state penitentiary and the Missouri River Correctional Center, so over 700 inmates dealing with 5 infirmary beds. So we will have a really nice medical unit with infirmary beds, clinic, and a new pharmacy. And then we also have a new orientation and reception unit and an administrative segregation, which is kind of a jail within the prison to deal with the most difficult inmates that can't function in population. So that will be a vast improvement to be able to manage the population.
To what extent do you think that, well, let me back up a moment. There is a proposal, as you're aware, to move the Missouri River Correctional Center closer to the main state prison, and turn the Missouri River Correctional Center property over to the State Parks Department to make a park out of it. Could you tell us what you think about that idea?
Well, the bill, as initially introduced, changed significantly as it came out of the House. So it's not as we're not as opposed to it as it came out of the House. Our big concerns were the Missouri River Correctional Center houses 150 minimum security male inmates, and we did not want that located to the grounds of the state penitentiary because of safety and security reasons. The Missouri River Correctional Center, where it's located, is very remote, and we do not want it in a population base where we are constantly dealing with the public and introducing contraband into the facility, and thus the minimum security inmates introducing contraband into the maximum security. So it came out of House appropriations with not moving it to the state penitentiary, with $200,000 for a study to look at what it would look like if they moved it into Mandan, closer to our youth correctional facility. And also it changed it so that none of the land would be turned over to Parks and Rec until the facility would actually be relocated. And then it places $12 million into the penitentiary land fund. And then in case next biennium, if they would decide to move it, that money would go towards moving it at that time. So it really delays it. And I think one of the things we brought up is that the time was not right. And this biennium, the 13-15 biennium, will be very telling as to how our population grows and what level of custody beds we need. Because it really doesn't make sense to replace minimum security beds when we may have a greater need to actually add medium or maximum security beds to our facilities.
And so, do you still oppose this proposal to, I mean, even as it's modified, do you still dislike it?
I would rather see it go away, but it's much more palatable the way it came out of the House. So.
And this would be a study to relocate the Missouri River Correctional Center to Mandan?
The way the bill was is a study to determine if there's efficiencies to be gained by locating the two facilities close to each other.
In your opinion, just as a prison professional, do you think that there are efficiencies to be gained, or are they outweighed by the drawbacks?
I don't know that there's many efficiencies to be gained between the two facilities. We're still going to have to interact with the minimums. Once if they have problems in the minimum security prison, they'll still have to be brought up to the penitentiary for a higher security housing. But I don't know that the efficiencies are worth spending the money to replace a perfectly good correctional facility at this point.
So is it fair to say that you'd prefer that the Missouri River Correctional Center be left alone?
Sure, I don't know what the rush is. They've been debating this for over 30 years. I just found a study where the State Parks and Rec was looking at doing this 30 years ago. The land's still there. It's going to be there for another 30 years. I think there's greater needs in the state than replacing a perfectly good correctional facility.
As you know, we have some proposals in the legislature to have minimum sentences for DUI offenders. Do you have any idea at this point how this might affect your inmate growth trends at the state penitentiary?
I think Dave might be able to.
Mr. Dave Krabenoff is also with us, along with Leanne Birch, who is the Director of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and Mr. Dave Krabenoff is the Chief Budget Guy at the agency. And what do you have to say to that question, Dave?
Well, both of the DUI bills are going to affect us if they pass. As they stand right now, the engrossed bills, it's just a matter of how much. The one came out of the Senate, I think it was 2240. Yeah, that one is a little different than 1302. 1302 has a treatment program in it right now, but essentially these bills, when they come out, they'll have an impact of increasing what we estimate, using the minimum mandatories. It's upwards of 250 more inmates by the next biennium, the 15-17 biennium. Will have a pretty big impact in the first year of the biennium too.
And these are not first offenders, are they? They're repeat offenders.
Yeah, the first and second on both the bills. When we did the fiscal note, both of the bills we had just the felony offenses, which were the third and fourth and subsequent after that. So it's going to have a big effect. And like Leanne mentioned about the expansion of the prison, if these go through, I mean, we're going to fill up that much faster. So it's something we're looking at and following, and we're hoping that we're all in agreement. I think we got to get tougher on DUIs in the state, and we're not putting these in to influence any of the legislation. We just want to make sure that everybody's aware of what impact we are going to have on corrections.
To what extent do DUI offenders make up the current population of the prison system?
Right now, we probably have anywhere about 30 DUI offenders incarcerated. But one of the things I brought out when we were testifying on the fiscal note on the DUI bills is that we looked at what South Dakota has, and right now they have a third felony within 10 years as a felony. What these DUI bills are proposing here, and July 31st of 2011, they had 431, and we had 28 DUI offenders. So you can see that would be like the size of the James River Correctional Center for us if we would be impacted the same way South Dakota was impacted.
Do you think that that's something that's likely, that we would have the same effect in North Dakota as South Dakota did when they instituted their tougher DUI penalties?
Well, I think because we told the legislators what South Dakota had experienced, they also tried to put some things in the bill that would temper that, such as the 24/7 program, the option for treatment and then completing the treatment program and then having the remainder of your sentence be suspended and being placed on probation. So I think there's some very good things in the bill that would hopefully temper that type of growth in North Dakota, but we still would have some significant growth.
One of the things as well that I wanted to discuss is there's legislation for a new issue of license plates, and those are manufactured at Rough Rider Industries, which is the prison manufacturing operation. And what effect would this have, a new license plate issue, on Rough Rider Industries and your ability to? I mean, are you set up to crank out license plates?
Yeah, it would be a positive effect. I mean, it's something that I don't know if we have an opinion whether it should happen or not, but if it does happen, we're able to handle it. It would mean more jobs for inmates, and we'd have to buy some new equipment. But Rough Rider they don't receive any general funds. It's all funds that they use through the operation of their business. So if that does come through, and if it does pass and be signed by the governor, we're going to be ready for it, and we're looking forward to it.
I mean, you manufacture license plates now. To what extent, what is the demand for them presently under the current system that we have?
They produce about 330,000 a year right now. If they put a new general issue in, that would mean about 1.2 million license plates that they would have to produce within a year's time.
And how many more inmates would you need working at the license plate factory to make that many plates?
About 7 to 10.
Okay. Are these jobs that teach skills that are usable on the outside?
I don't know that necessarily that making license plates is a transferable skill. However, as far as hard skills go, but any job that they have to go to every day, it does teach them skills such as soft skills about how to actually have a work ethic, get up and go to work, and actually budget some of the money that they earn.
I would like to know, how is the women's prison in New England doing? That when this was established, there was some discussion about how it's frankly more expensive to run than the normal DOCR facility. And how is that still the case, and how is it working out as a women's prison?
The staff there do a wonderful job. It is more expensive, and I don't think that's anything that we didn't expect when you put a facility out in a very rural, isolated part of the state and expect to hire all the professional services that you need inside of a prison. So obviously it is more expensive, and they are doing a great job with the staff they have, but they are facing, of course, what a lot of businesses are facing is turnover issues and trying to recruit and retain staff to fully staff the facility.
And one of the questions I was thinking of was that in that location, how much competition for labor do you have with other employment opportunities, say, for example, in the oil field?
Quite a bit of competition.
They're feeling it just like everybody is, probably more so than we are, but to find someone to get them to come to work, there's always that competitive wage that they're working on. So that's part of their request this time, is that they want to increase the salaries of their people too. In DWCRC at New England, it always gets down to the economy of scales too. 130 people, well, it's 126 is their operating capacity. So a facility that small that takes care of all levels of custody, that has to have all the services comparable to what we do here at NDSP. It is more expensive. But if you want to say that, prisons, men, women, small or large, are very expensive to run.
How is the legislature handling your budget requests? Do you think that they're dealing with them with appropriate seriousness, if that's the case? I mean, I was thinking, when you come in and you say, we need this many personnel, are they sympathetic to that, or are they skeptical of it? How would you describe the reception?
I think our legislature does a good job. They really try to understand what the issues are that we're faced with, and we try to give them as much information as what they need to make an informed decision. But there's different styles in the Senate and between the Senate and the House, and we move over to the House side this time. But it's something we look forward to because they really go through the budget in detail, and we look at. So I think they do a pretty good job of it.
Is the House rougher on you in terms of giving you personnel?
I think they're a little more skeptical of that, and but in their I don't know if defense is the right word, but they try to understand what we're faced with, and I think they give us, for the most part, a fair shake. We disagree a few times, but they never leave us really hanging. So,
Director Birch, earlier that you mentioned that the population is a bit more violent. What sort of issues does that give rise to in terms of like the safety of corrections officers and just the management difficulties in the prison if you have a more violent population than you otherwise would?
Well, I think it just emphasizes the need to have very well trained and professional staff. And one of the top priorities for us this biennium was the governor's salary package, which would mean about $8 million in wages for our individuals. And that would really help the high turnover rate. We are up to over 18.3% turnover in 2012. And 58% of our employees are in the bottom quartile of their salaries, and 88% are in the bottom half. And just to emphasize, this ends up being a public safety issue when you can't retain staff. At NDSP alone, 40% of our staff there have less than 1 year of experience. And when you're dealing with a very dangerous and risky population, you really want to be able to hang on to some of your well-trained staff and not rely on someone that might have just been there 4 months when something goes bad.
Is it primarily a problem of wages, that the folks are not paid enough, or are there other factors at play here?
Wages is the key one. They get recruited away. We even have competition with the local county jails where they'll pay more than what we're able to pay. The oil field jobs have taken some of our staff. So I think that would go a long ways in helping. Hopefully the new facility will also be a better work environment for the staff as well.
How do you think that will happen, the new facility being a better work environment?
Just even the design of it is more open, better lines of sight. Just the environment, it's not instead of working in a 100-year-old cell house with no air in it, there'll be more open housing units. So I just think that'll lend to a safer environment and a more comfortable environment to work in.
Do you think it'll be a better environment for the inmates as well?
Well, with inmates, I think it'll be, from our standpoint, it should be more daylight, better air. They won't have as much privacy like they have in some of those little cells in the East Cell House, and that seems to be a big thing for inmates, is their privacy.
Mm-hmm. We've been speaking this evening with Leanne Birch. She's the director of the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. And we've also been speaking to Mr. Dave Kravinoff, who is the top budget man at the agency. We've been talking about issues in the prison system as they relate to the North Dakota Legislature. Thank you very much.